All right, everyone. Hello. Welcome back to Dan's Astrology. So today is October 22nd. Tomorrow, the sun will ingress into the sign of Scorpio, where it will make a square aspect to Pluto in Aquarius. Now, in a previous video about Pluto aspects, I pointed out that Pluto is a very small planet. It's around the size of the moon, maybe even a bit smaller, if I remember correctly. Um, and because of its tiny size, it's better to use a small orb with it, basically. So for this reason, I'm being I'm specifically making a point of doing this video now because we've only got a small window where the Sun Pluto aspect is significant, right? Um, Now, you may notice as well that I've changed some of the graphic in this video to reflect the constellation of Scorpio, which I have to admit, don't get it twisted. First of all, signs and constellations are not the same thing. So if you hear any astrology skeptic telling you that tropical astrology is irrelevant because the signs have drifted apart from the constellations, that's not how tropical astrology is practiced in the first place. And perhaps, I don't know, I kind of thought it looked cool though to have this little constellation image with the stars. But the truth is that the in tropical astrology it has more to do with a seasonal basis, which makes a little bit more sense if you are in the northern hemisphere, with Scorpio having to with this lead up into Halloween feeling very much like Scorpio season. It's not because the sun is still in Libra. We're not technically not there at the point of recording this video, but I figured I would switch the graphic to the Scorpion image, and make it now because of this tight Pluto aspect that's happening, and to give an example of you know, the tradition of Halloween is also connected to the Day of the Dead or All Saints Day, and it's when the veil is said to be thin, and there's a certain kind of like atmosphere where it could be the fog or the mist, or it could be the darkness this time of year. The thing is, well, there's something interesting thing about this particular moment for me in that I'm looking after my mom and I'm looking after the pets that we have, and we had a number of we had our one of our dogs passed away this year. My mom's horse passed away this year, and in this transition, we had two dogs, and because one dog was a bit older and had arthritis, she was not up for walking around as much as the other dog is. And after the death of one dog, a new there's a new pattern formed where the other dog wanted to go for walks in the evening as well as the morning. And it got me into this new cycle of taking her out. Oh, here she is. She knows I'm talking about her. After dinner, right? After dinner, I would take her out. Um, and What's interesting about this is that prior to the death of the other dog, I was in this habit of walking them only in the AM hours, basically in the morning time. And now there's something interesting about this that the sense that the dog passed away. What was it, the spring or the summer, and now it's the fall, and it's like the new habit of walking in the evening, but then it's like getting dark in the evening, and it's also depending it might fluctuate when we eat dinner or something like that. But I've got this habit, anyways, of always taking her for a walk out after dinner. But there's this kind of sense of the darkness coming more and more and more, and it getting colder out in a way that when you're there's something about doing it as a habit every day to go for a walk in the evening rather than just the morning, where it makes me more aware of the sense of every time I go out it's a little bit darker. And that there's also this kind of thing about twilight where they call it like terror twilight, in that apparently it's when automobile accidents are the most common, because it's like people are, you might, you're used to daylight, and then you have to turn the lights on in your car, the street light. There's this kind of in between there where apparently people are caught off guard or they haven't adjusted, right? And there's sort of liminals, like the liminal zones are also an image for the threshold between life and death, and whatever, the ghosts, and or the material world and the spirit world, all these kinds of things, right? So there's this kind of like increased sense of like being on this liminal threshold of the living and the dead and all this. And this is, of course, one of the themes that comes up with Halloween, whether you're talking about stuff like zombie movies or ghost stories, or even stuff like, vampires and Dracula deal with the undead, these people that are not quite human, and also somewhere in the in between, not quite living, not quite dead. And with Pluto, okay, so Pluto is the archetype of obviously the underworld, right? In Greek mythology, Pluto stood for, the name Pluto was the guy who was the ruler of the underworld. But in Greek it's also Hades, and the name of the ruler and the place is kind of mixed up, right? There's the idea of the underworld, the place where all the dead. It's kind of like a little bit more, not quite as negative as hell, because the hell is defined in a dichotomy with heaven, whereas in Greek mythology, if you are, everybody who dies goes to the underworld, good or bad. They may have a places, different circles or whatever reserved for the bad people or whatever. But the idea is that you don't join Mount Olympus and the gods when you die in Greek mythology. You go to all the souls of the ancestors are in the underworld, right? And there's this kind of the zombie movie, of course, is the thing that won't die, or the thing that is half alive or comes back to life. But there's also there's this interesting theme with zombie movies that deals with the liminality between the human and the non-human, because it's like the zombie movie, of course, is a monster movie where all the monsters are previously humans who have been transformed into the non-human monster, right? And with this in mind, because it's Halloween, I have gone to this thing in recent years when we're approaching Halloween season to start watching Halloween movies. And so far, I've watched a couple. I watched Alien Romulus, which, to be honest, I thought was meh, wasn't that great. Nothing really to get excited about. And then I watched 28 Years Later. And 28 Years Later is interesting because when I was a young man, probably at the peak of graduating high school was around the time that the original one came out, or somewhere in that high school age range, the kind when young adolescent men would typically be really interested in watching zombie movies. And it sort of triggered a revival of the zombie movie genre. And it's, obviously the zombie movies from day one have always had a sort of social, political kind of undercurrent, And in that atmosphere of being a millennial in the 2000s era, it was clear that there was some obvious commentary about the aftermath of September 11th and the sort of climate of fear and paranoia and all this kind of stuff that ensued, or hyper vigilant protectivism and all this kind of stuff, right? And it's interesting. I think that they actually made a 28 months later as well, which I was not. I think I skipped that one. I don't think I ever saw it. I don't think it was not. I went through phases where I was just really not interested in keeping up with movies, and so there's probably all these things. Maybe I'll go back and watch 28 months later and see if it's any good. But so I missed the second one and went to the third one, and I was kind of I didn't really. I have to admit that sometimes I'm I have to like I don't. There's one of the things is like there's certain influences going into this that I kind of wonder if I should get into or not. But one of the things sometimes, perhaps, perhaps when my watch YouTube habits have me watching things that mess up my algorithm or something like that, and I get exposed to some sort of like far right extremist content or like stuff that's like subtly so that's full of all kinds of like dog whistles. But anyways, there's obviously a very large far right movement in the UK right now, and I'm a Canadian on the West Coast where it's the politics are couldn't be any more different. So there's this kind of issue where I find the UK making a movie set in the UK, dealing with a UK audience versus being a Canadian West Coaster. It's kind of like it's not really my culture, right? But there's this I was kind of my curiosity was provoked because there was some influencer online who was criticizing. He said he went to the theaters to go see it, and maybe he even walked out and he used the words because all like all movies these days are Scheiße, right? Like as if you are a Nazi or something like that speaking German, and it's or like a kind of a dog whistle to be like the cult we. And this is why am I bringing this up, because with Pluto, there's the idea that Pluto was discovered during the time that the fascism was becoming a thing, and that in Pluto has sort of been, the attitude of Pluto is basically like to do with elimination, expulsion, death and renewal, death and transformation. But it's kind of like you see the archetype of Pluto when it comes to this kind of stuff. You could see it for one thing very obviously in just the zombie movie genre in general. But then when you take this whole political climate that's going on, it's like the Nazis had this idea that there was degenerate art, right? That art and culture had gotten so bad that the fact that the movies weren't very good was just a symptom of a culture which had become degenerate, and that basically you needed to have a purification. You needed to basically have a mass wave of destruction to wipe out the culture, to give you to basically regenerate, to refresh, and that basically now you have a bunch of we live in a climate now where the internet or at least the UK, you see these maybe it's a different story in America because when the masses taking the street are at least more progressive in America, but in the UK you have masses of very hyper vigilant, the fear of the outsider, protectionist, isolationist, nationalistic. You know what I'm trying to say? And then you get into these things about like topics of eugenicists and stuff like that, or this idea of there's this question. What I found what was interesting about 28 years later, the movie, is that it kind of the fact that a guy who was a very far right seeming dude really didn't like this movie made me interested to watch it, to see exactly, and then I could see that it was almost as if this movie was made intentionally to upset or disappoint that kind of audience, right? Because one of the things about the zombie movie is that you could say that the zombie is a kind of like a dehumanized person, where the person is now just a monster. They're treated like an object. They've lost all their humanity, and they're just a violent monster who's dangerous, right? And that in 28 Days Later tries to push in the other direction, and or 28 years later, and the uncomfortable horror of humanizing the zombie. There's a scene even in there where a zombie gives birth. There's a lot of, but then there's also the alpha male zombie, and it becomes kind of the point where it's a very exaggerated social satire. Kind of reminded me a little bit of the Matrix, the one that they did that was kind of tongue in cheek, the reboot that was kind of like, as the British would say, taking the piss a little bit. That maybe there's this kind of like whatever expectation the audience has for a serious take on one of these movies, there seems to be a pattern of the directors subverting those expectations and going against the grain. And I think that this movie did it very well. There's also things going on, mind you. In the very beginning of the movie, they have a kind of like going back to the original outbreak, and it starts off with a bunch of, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, cute little white kids who are sat down in front of the TV to watch Teletubbies, signaling the 1990s, right? The era of 90s naivety, kind of a utopist globalism, but there's also this kind of absentee, the absent parent, and maybe we'll all be all right if we just sit the kids down in front of the TV, let the TV be the babysitter, while the parents have to deal with survival, right? Survival in a increasingly competitive capitalist society, and then amongst those pressures, the door gets burst down, and a bunch of ravenous, foaming at the mouth dudes come for the innocent young children. They're kind of one of these things where, with a very light touch, you can notice that also in the background in the news these days, the Prince Andrew was recently just renounced his position, or given up his position as the Duke of York, and there's all this scandal about Epstein and the fear about protecting the children or child abuse, all this kind of stuff. I don't need to get into all the details around it, but this is part of the Pluto in Aquarius is kind of like the boogeyman. Squaring Scorpio is that there is this sort of like fear of the other, the threat of the, or like the people. There's it kind of goes. What I'm trying to say is it kind of goes both ways in like the horror of dehumanization or all the atrocities that happen. That when we dehumanize the other and treat them like a dangerous animal that needs to be, that is just like a ravenous dog or something like that. But then also there's this horror that the people that are supposed to be, the idea that the social hierarchy of human civilization is that the nobles are supposed to be the refined, civilized people who have sort of become gentle and become the most civilized in evolving away from these lowly animal habits. And there are like they're sort of like a shining example that the lowly masses wishes that they see them as an ideal to eat, not somebody who is actually just a ravenous ghoul who's going to harm your children, right? Or that there's this kind of thing where there is the id, or the shadow of the culture, the blind spot, right? There's this kind of thing. It plays off it from the very beginning. This whole thing of like, we're just going to like put all the kids in front of the TV, let them watch Teletubbies, lock the door, and have this whole blind spot in which we just have a neglected neglected children in a media saturated world, and the predators rush in, right? The fear that it's structurally, there's also kind of funny because, it's also, there's this whole question about power dynamics with Pluto and exploitation with Pluto as well, and blind spots, to exploiting the blind spots, exploiting the structural imbalances and all this kind of stuff. And there's, of course, the whole culture war that plays out in the aftermath of the Me Too movement. And part of the problem about all of this is, like, to some extent, it's like socially normalized, or it becomes hypocritical, because it's like there's this basic idea of like people are just doing what they need to do in order to survive, right? But then when you think about Pluto in terms of survival, this is what's kind of interesting to me, because there's a sort of like evolutionary thing, right? And that there's two different types of evolution, right? There's evolution in terms of like survival of the fittest, which is basically in a very live or dog eat dog, live or die environment, whichever survives in that kind of hostile environment, the traits that survive in that environment go on to replicate, right? And being like the one that has it's whatever traits lead to having the most grip on survival. However, apparently there's this other kind of thing where the people do with evolutionary astrology that's all about, if there is a soul that reincarnates lifetime after lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, that eventually the more it plays the survival game, the more it starts to, do I really want to come back or reincarnate to do that trip over again, to just lifetime after lifetime gripping onto survival? What happens if after all these reincarnations, the grip on the existential grip on surviving starts to relax a little bit, and then the experience of an incarnation is not about gripping onto power, gripping onto survival, gripping onto control, gripping onto what if there's easing the existential grip, and the more evolved is not the one that has the more brutally efficient way to crush the enemy and hold on to power, but actually relax and sort of let go and lighten up a little bit, right? So there's this different kinds of evolution. One kind of evolution to bring back, I also watched that Alien Romulus movie. The whole theme of Alien Romulus is that is the highly competitive environment could just create a really scary monster that wins, and that's your beautiful survival of the fittest thing that will survive in any jungle dog eat dog scenario. Versus is that really the evolution that you want to idealize? And then is there a kind of this sort of like false ideal in our nobility, like what we see as leaders or monarchs or nobles? Maybe what if it's not just black and white? What if they have their own, like, it's obvious that the royals have their own shadow, that they have their own. There's this basic premise that the division between good and evil is not out there in the world, but runs between every human heart or whatever, right? And the fact that anybody is going to have good sides and bad sides, and that with Jungian psychology, it's often the more that we are externalizing it, the more that we are in the grip of a shadow projection, where that we are afraid of some outsider mirroring to us some quality that we ourselves have that we don't want to look at, or that precisely because the thing is, if we are even able to perhaps cognize that could be possible, it's going to happen more if we're unable to even admit that to ourselves, that there's some sort of thing that is like very just buried deep, that we need some enemy to project these things onto, and that the solution then becomes also this process of scapegoating, that the solution is to then purify away the enemy as a to regenerate, because they're a degenerate, right? Everything has become degenerate, and we just need to purify the bad apples, and then we'll get all the good stuff back or whatever, right? And there's a sort of like, this is the but in the same sense, it's happening in this sort of blind spot, right? Where it's in this like this. I don't know. Maybe I'm going. Maybe I'm talking too much. Let me just take a sip and think about things here. I mean, it's also obvious. I mean, I should also throw it in here. A bit different, that there is that whole three-eye atlas thing going on as well. And I personally don't. I'm not making any claims that I know anything about whether it's aliens or not aliens, or any claim as to the nature of this. But it's interesting to note that currently this object has been behind the sun. So if you were so within, it's kind of interesting also how this times up with Halloween, and that when you're talking about Pluto in Aquarius, there's often a certain kind of alien thing that comes in with the myth of Ganymede, the idea that there was, like, I think it was, I'm not going to get into the one. Was it Zeus who took the form of an eagle, or I don't know. There's this whole thing about like somebody being swooped up to be made like the boy toy of the gods or whatever, right? And that is kind of like an archetype that you see in the alien abduction narrative or whatever. And so there's something about Pluto and Aquarius that often gets associated with the alien abduction conspiracy. And there's also a lot of paranoia around this, being that what if it's all just a government plot or something like that, right? It's all just a ruse. It's not, it's fake, right? But there's this kind of like the idea of ignorance about it, not knowing the blind spot, and that blind spot being an opportunity for manipulation, for coercion, for exploitation, for any number of things. And similar to, like, there's this kind of question, like, what happens if I'm just thinking with this sort of thing from the very beginning of this new movie 28 years later, where they have the kids watching Teletubbies, and then the zombie outbreak happens, and the poor, vulnerable, innocent children, and they're just left for a TV as a babysitter. Or now we have a new generation of iPad children, or like kids who are just going on online, massively multiplayer online games, and this whole kind of thing of like absent parent. Like, the thing is, the whole structure of this, like, not just absent parenting, but a whole structure that, like, when I go online, like, you could think about this idea of having if you're cooking food yourself, you have more control over it not being junk food, right? That you are, like, you could take, or you could, there are lots of recipes for even just talking about McDonald's food, right? Like, I don't eat at McDonald's anymore, but if I wanted to make a hamburger that had some of the same ingredients, like, I could take pickles and onions and try to make it like in a McDonald's hamburger and eat it, and then be like, oh, the flavor's pretty good. I could go for a good cheeseburger with some pickles and onions and tomatoes on it or something. But then if I make that at home versus I eat that at McDonald's, I'm like, how did I ever used to eat this before, right? There's something about the there's some weird thing that I notice about advertising, in that I have really things that personally I am, maybe other people, maybe this makes me different than other people, but I have always really been into home cooking, cooking myself, not eating that much fast food. I've been getting even more like this over the years as I want to be more healthy and stuff like that. But there's like, there's also something like depressing to me about things like microwave dinners or like TV dinners, or yeah, I don't even really even like frozen food very much, right? Like one of the things I really don't like is frozen pizzas. And I mean, sometimes you might luck out and get one that's like sort of okay, but most cases I'm like, why don't you either get a not just a fresh pizza, like from a restaurant or something, or if you make it yourself, you could like get some pizza sauce, get some cheese, get some toppings, put it in the oven, and like 9 times out of 10, that's a lot better than buying a frozen pizza, right? And so, but there's something about like, based on my consumer profiles, I really don't like that stuff. But then there's like, it's like they're trying to like, there's this pattern of advertising to me, something that I don't like, that's probably less healthy and less quality than what I would do for myself already. And it's like, but the thing is, they're not selling you this product because you would like it better than what you have already. What they're trying to say is that you're living a lifestyle where you are putting a lot of your own labor energy into caring for your own food, to make your own food a certain way, and that what if instead you could just eat a bunch of junk food, and then you could free all that time up and energy to do something else, right? But then its question is like, well, what would I be doing exactly, right? What would I be doing to justify, like, you know, and the same thing is like, you could be having, as a parent, you could have a very involved, looking after your kids and making, but the media environment would say, well, I mean, maybe normalize instead just having a generation of Ipod babies, or this whole generation, like it normalizes this thing where it's like, you have to make a lot of money, so your kids all have the newest iPod so that they can do all the streaming things, and then meanwhile the streaming things is going to be this, like, you're going to be too busy being a productive parent that your kids are going to be exposed to online child predators, and then you're going to be like, this whole structured thing we're going to like, people are even talking about the risk of AI and algorithms as actually being geared to accentuate this for some reason, right? Because, or it's like who are the people that are designing what are the inherent biases in the structure of the software, and that are there just like armies of people that do not have good intentions, that are just looking to exploit any blind spot, any weakness, any way to take advantage of things. And that it's like, when you look at things, what's in the news about Prince Andrew or the Epstein thing about Donald Trump, is that this goes all the way to the top of how our power structures work. And there's this whole kind of, it's also really weird because, I mean, it gets into all this weird stuff about like the creepiness of like the manosphere and all this kind of thing, where it's like, I don't know. There's this kind of thing. I used to like to go, I don't know, to like parties or go out dancing or all this kind of stuff, but if like the whole thing is like, if you and your girlfriend want to have like a good night out, and your girlfriend is like paranoid that people are going to spike her drink and date rape her, it's just not a good vibe, first of all, right? You don't want, but there's also like, there's always this sort of like climate of like, I keep thinking about watching, also like, it's kind of this odd thing, this odd ball of associations, that like, I keep thinking of watching Terminator, like the old Terminator movies, like, maybe because of this whole Pluto and Aquarius is very Terminator, right? But it always reminds me that I had this like experience when I had my first relationship that I was in when I was in high school. I had some friends also that were city kids or whatever. And there was one day where me and my girlfriend were hanging out with some of my friends in the city, and we went over to some girl's house that had like a Yaletown condo. And we're for some reason, whatever we decided to do, we settled on watching, I think it was not Terminator 2, but the first Terminator movie. And that there's something about like in the like there's like two separate things, right? There's the movie Terminator and this one specific memory of watching Terminator, but there's a thing about the Terminator. What is the Terminator? It's a humanoid robot sent from the future to kill and destroy and all this kind of stuff, right? And it's like we have a lot of stuff going on with AI right now, with computers, about fear of the tech bro military industrial complex making killer robots, basically. But other than that, there's also this fear about online predation, or the young people who are at risk of being exploited, and the idea of being taken, like if your kids are having like no supervision and they're just on the internet all day, and there's plenty of opportunities for ne'er-do-well predators to take advantage of them, and this triggering the hyper protective, hyper vigilant parent reflex. And that this is like the idea that the protective reflex, the instinctual reflex, is kind of like being like, if you think it's like an animal thing, right? It's like mama bear, right? And that there's something about like that kind of like this instinctual wiring of an animal is sort of like kind of like a machinistic machine, an animal. But anyways, there's something about this anyway, like in this particular story, it was like me and my girlfriend and some friends were watching the first Terminator movie, and I think during this time her like dad called to check on her and asked where she was, and she'd be like, "Oh, well, I'm in downtown Vancouver in a friend's condo in Yaletown." "Well, what are you doing?" "Well, we're just watching the first Terminator movie." "You're just watching the first?" Yeah, right, Missy. Yeah, right. You're just watching I'm coming down the. So it's like, and then like the dad just like drove down there, like 20, like raced there, like just 20 minutes. Okay, kids, party's over. No more. It's like we were literally just like hanging. Like there, I don't think anybody had any. Like there weren't any drugs. Nobody had. There wasn't any like there wasn't like a wild and crazy teen sex party. There wasn't any plan to like. Nobody was drinking. Like it was like just a whole bunch of like sober kids watching a movie. Nobody getting in trouble. But there's like being like we can't do anything because we have this hyper vigilant parental figure that's basically monitoring us at all time through our cell phones. And it's sort of like, you know, like back as kids, I didn't even pay for a cell phone. My parents were like, you know what? We're going to buy you a phone and pay your cell phone bill because we want to know where you are at all times, and we want to be able to call you and talk to you. And then if you have any problems, we want to be able to just race there and grab you and rescue you. And then it's kind of funny because it's like this is at the same like there is like there's this weird like lopsidedness where it feels like in situations when there isn't a problem that parents are like these like robot people who are in like red alert, like looking for danger anywhere, and then in other situations it's like maybe that was what it was. Maybe we've gone full circle. Like nowadays people are like. Maybe people don't care what their kids are doing anymore. Maybe that's like, maybe that was too much bubble wrapping for your child or whatever. We were like the bubble wrapped millennials, and maybe like now the generation of parents just don't give a shit, right? I don't know, or maybe like there's some kind of issue around this with Scorpio, Sun in Scorpio squaring Pluto and Aquarius. There's some issue around there about it's not just the. It's like the archetype of the this whole like authoritarian control regime being like a kind of paternalism where there's this like hyper protective parent which gets like it's like which either creates a structure that has all these blind spots that are intentionally there and that they are they themselves are like exploiting or taking advantage of the blind spots and then projecting that onto some hallucinated threat that isn't there. And then they go into like the red eye Terminator, like hyper, like destroy, search and destroy. Where's the threat? Like, and they don't actually see that they're already mixed up in their own corruption, that they do stuff, and so that there are so it's the kind of thing where it's like you try to trigger the parents into a state where they're so afraid that they're like, yes, we need security cameras everywhere, we need parental controls on everything, we need logins on anything, we need to keep the children safe. That's the most important thing. The children are our future. The most important thing is to keep our children safe, and that, oh my god, somebody's watching a movie, we got to go rescue. Like, and then at the same time, it's like, what kind of irritates me about this, that like being raised by parents as a millennial in a culture that's like this, being and having my time being, there's this whole question about like, do you trust strangers? Do you, like, when you go trick-or-treating at Halloween, do you trust your neighborhood, or are you afraid of people or something like that? Is it like, you need a certain fundamental trust to get along in civilized society, but there's something about like how there's this whole industry in making everybody afraid and then selling them this security culture to give yourself peace of mind. But then at the same time you have this you can see your family, you'll be able to look at them on GPS, you can see exactly where they are at all times, you can talk to them at all times, but then so can the cops. But then the cops are on your side. They're just there to keep you and your family safe, right? They're just there to protect you, right? And then when you start organizing community protests, then you start being annoyed at the security regime that you bought into because you were so afraid and insecure, right? There's this other thread here that I was trying to get to, though, is that we're raised in this culture where we have to feel like we're constantly being monitored by this sort of either the nanny state or a bunch of paternalistic authoritarian managers who want to control you and see where you're at and where you're doing at all times. And then if they're at any bit uncomfortable, they're going to rush in and like save you from your friends from watching a movie. And then we get this weird, and when we go on social media, we get this weird like self-help guru talk about like, no one's going to save you. Sorry, you're on your own. You're gonna have to learn from your mistakes. You're gonna have to take self-responsibility for your own choices in life. You're not gonna get saved. But if we're uncomfortable, we're just gonna swoop in and fucking rescue you from having a good time with your friends. But you're not gonna save you, right? Because we have to like, look, we have a lot of debt to pay off. No one's just going to come and, if you get student loans, no one's just going to forgive you your student loans. If you've got money to pay, like, this is the way it starts to become a little bit fucking hypocritical, because you can have people who are like, well, I don't know, like, I have all these like the same hyper-vigilant parent could be like, I just want you not to get mixed up with those fucking dirtbag kids. I want you to do good in school and study hard. And then the same daughter might have to be like, oh, well, I guess I have to start an OnlyFans page to pay off my student loans, and then sell my body out to pay for my education. But that's just being responsible, right? Because if that's your choice to go into debt, then it's your responsibility to pay that debt back. No one's going to save you. We all have to make sacrifices. Maybe you'll just have to take up a few more shifts at work, and instead of looking after your daughter on maternity leave, you'll just have to give her an iPad, and then you'll have and it's just like, it's like the structure itself creates the problem and then sells a solution, and then it feels just retarded, basically, right? This is but the same thing about this is that it's also like, there's a certain kind of like gaslighty kind of thing to it, because it's like, there could actually be actual threats, or that free speech is never free, because you don't want to make yourself a target to some, so you always have to kind of walk this line but then it becomes kind of like it starts to feel kind of like gaslighty to be like, to be like, well, we live in a free society where, you know, if you want to, I don't, maybe I'm making a mountain out, like, there's also the being fixated on certain things and making a mountain out of a molehill on certain things, but it's sort of like saying that, like, look, we're not here to tell you what to do. You can do whatever you want, and no, but if you get in trouble, no one's going to save you. So you have to take responsibility for yourself. But then you take 2 steps outside the front door, and the whole fucking surveillance system, like, you have like drones following you, and the cops like, you know, it's like, you know, like, okay, well, maybe I'll just stay at home then, right? And that's my choice, right? I have to take responsibility. If I don't, it's not my, I shouldn't be resentful to anybody else. I'm just being like a homebody, recluse, staying at home, not doing anything. And it's because, like, it's like the most, it's like, it's just, I don't know. I have to admit, going into this video, I have been a little bit moody or a little bit irritable, and maybe that's coloring it, but it is a grand water trine. It is Sun square Pluto. These are some heavy duty transits. This is what's on my mind today. My attempt to make the most relevant video possible to this art dynamic of Sun and Scorpio square Pluto and Aquarius. I hope you like it. Thanks for watching. My name is Dan. This is Dan's Astrology. Please like and subscribe. Support the channel. If you're interested in having an astrology reading, I am fully trained to provide you with that service. Thanks for watching.